Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in this lovely world on your own screen. Welcome to the CRMKonvo show. And today we have the great pleasure to have two of our regular guests again on the AI topic, Dr. Michael Wu and Jonathan Reed. Welcome both. So, as I goofed very much on doing too long introductions, I keep the pleasure to introduce themselves with our guests so I make no mistakes and get no bad marks by my co-host. So, Michael, would you prefer to start? I will be enlightened.
So I'm Dr. Michael Wu. I'm the Chief AI Strategist at Pros. Been there 7 years. Prior to that, I was Chief Scientist at a social media company in the Bay Area, and that's where I met you. And I've been here on this show, I think, quite a few times. So it's a pleasure to be back.
Yeah.
Highly appreciated that you are back again. And we love you. We love you, and we love you have you here with us. Jonathan.
Hello. So yeah, co-founder Diginomica. Great to be back with you all. My focus is on real world transformation in the enterprise. To some extent, I'm pretty tech agnostic because I care about what gets results for customers, and I want to call BS on what doesn't get results. And I really don't care whether it's metaverse or blockchain or wearing fancy goggles or don't wear the goggles. Whatever works, I want to document it. And you know, obviously the last few years I've become pretty obsessed with AI, which is a sign of the fact that I do think it's an important technology. And so I'm trying to challenge myself to be an original thinker in this area. And that to me is a much higher bar than the various discussions that I typically hear amongst enterprise people. So I'm trying to be original. We'll see if I can succeed.
Well, from where I sit, you do.
You know, the trick to do that? The trick to do that is don't read anything and don't watch anything. Come up
That's
with
interesting. That's an interesting take. I'm doing a different one, which is casting a really wide net. Like I spent a lot of time geeking out on stuff on AI that has nothing to do with the enterprise. But anyway, on we go. I know these guys have an exciting agenda for us. So
we have.
And by the way, hi Brent, good to see you.
Yeah. Welcome back also to our audience, and we love your interaction. So that is the call to action to our folks which are with us, listening and also viewing. Feel free to add your comments. We will put you on as it is adequate, and we do not cut too much into the flow, or we even create a new piece of the flow. So we are grateful that Jon is authentic and is skeptical to a lot of stuff, which makes it always very interesting. We, in the pre-show discussion, had a quick overview about what we have today. Today, we would like to dig in on the ethics of agentic AI. To do a proper start is that we at least touch a bit the base of the return of investment question, and where's the beef? Is this all bullshitting us as consumers? Is it all in a way of we just tell about fairy tales and try to cheat our customers, or is there an honest piece of trust building exercises and a potential that we might get some success out of the whole bubble or wave? But we have to look for, and then we are into the ethics and in cut out mistakes one can make. Gentlemen, what is your take on the provocative starter from my end? Is it all bullshitting, or is it some honest piece, or is it fairy tales?
Well, let me just frame this a little bit. I think one of the big problems that we have is that it's really hard to get a handle on this because the media coverage around it is so sensational that digging under and understanding what's real is really, really tough. For example, like just this last week, one of the things that provoked a lot of stuff was this MIT study that 90% of generative AI pilots fail. And this, when you dig into it, it's a really problematic thing to do, because everyone walked around saying, well, look what MIT found. Well, in fact, it's a very small group inside of MIT. And it's a very small sample size in the study, which they themselves admit. And yet everyone took that and ran with it as if it was like biblical truth around AI. And in fact, the authors of the report are quite bullish on AI. And it's actually the most interesting thing about that report is to read about the 5% of projects that were successful that they looked at, and also what they think is going to be successful in the future. And so, in fact, that paper was about how there's going to be unbridled success for AI if we can learn from these things. So I've that's just one example of the misdirections. But what I will say is that over the course of many, many studies that have come out, it's become clear that just giving people LLMs in a work environment doesn't increase their productivity substantially. And this is important because a lot of the purveyors of this technology promised us 10x to 100x improvements in various kinds of things like developer productivity. Study after study after study has debunked those claims, but that doesn't mean that no ROI is possible. And in fact, one of the problems with the studies we have to date is that the most extensive and thorough ones have to go back a year or two into this technology to look at them. And a lot has changed since then. And what I want to talk about after Michael weighs in is why enterprise AI done properly is different than a lot of these studies. But there has been a cumulative effect of these studies. And just to give you one quick example of that in kind of a vivid way, recently, Francois Chalet, who's a very significant AI researcher who runs what he calls the ARC challenge that benchmarks a bunch of LLMs with the goal of like, are they moving closer to quote unquote super intelligence? He's a very interesting and informed individual. He posted on X recently, LLM adoption amongst US workers is closing in on 50%. Meanwhile, labor productivity growth is lower than in 2020. Now, I'm not cherry picking that, because a bunch of studies back up that type of thing. But that doesn't mean that there aren't some very, very important developments in this field that can help companies be more successful. And so I want to shine a light on how to do these projects right, instead of obsessing over why just giving people LLMs doesn't work, because I can tell you for a fact that that's not going to be enough to get enterprise productivity, is to give someone an LLM and say go to work. That's not going to be enough.
Yeah, definitely. I think I would say that, like, I would agree that, the study, is kind of limited in sample size, and it's maybe not general enough. And it's a good to learn from the 5% that does do well, right? But the challenge with these type of Gen AI technology, LLM or others, right, is that like the application is so broad, right? So it's hard to kind of have kind of a consensus, like what's the ROI? Maybe the application in customer support yield a different ROI than sales support versus marketing automation. It's completely different, right? So it's hard to get a kind of a more statistically significant data point in terms of ROI. However, it is, yeah. Go ahead. You're gonna.
And it's not only totally different, also the measurement is totally differently difficult. I mean,
sure, yeah, that's
in the service scenario, it's fairly easy, but in
that's
terms
the same
of
with any technology, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the same with any technology, any kind of new technology, right? It's people don't really know how to measure its impact. So, but I do want to say that the ROI is, I would say, does take time to accumulate. Okay, primarily because of the type of mechanism that Gen AI is able to drive in terms of the ROI, the mechanism ROI that Gen AI is able to drive. Okay, most of the time, Gen AI realize or recognize or create ROI through the mechanism of productivity increase and efficiency gain. Okay, so what does that mean? That means it takes time to accumulate those benefits and turn them into real financial benefit for the company, right? So, so efficiency and productivity is what we call this instantaneous measurement, right? It's like a velocity, right? Think of it. So let's say like let's just use example. It's a very simple example like running, right? If I can run with a velocity of, let's say I run a minute, I could run 100 meters. I can run really fast, okay? And John runs even faster, right? John runs 101 meter.
I'm not sure that I do, but anyhow, yeah.
Okay, but the point is that like if you only run for a minute, right? John will be just a meter ahead of me, right? If you run for 10 minutes, he'll be 10 meters ahead of me. And if we run for a year, right? John will be very, very much further ahead of me, right? So it takes time to accumulate those instantaneous kind of efficiency and productivity gain. Okay,
Michael, can you talk about the phases of deployment that you were discussing earlier before we went on live? Because I think that'd be really useful.
Yeah. So I will get into that. So cool. So I think in terms of ROI, right? So MIT has this 4-stage kind of Gen AI maturity model, right? Basically, the first stage is experimentation, right? And then the second stage is you have a running pilot that's actually running, maybe not in production, okay, but it's running, okay. And the third stage is when you actually deploy and scale in production environment. And then the fourth stage is your future-proof, your company, completely future-proof in the Gen AI world, agentic world. So it turns out that the ROI for the first 2 stages are negative. Yeah, I think the first stage is like minus like 12, 13%, and then second stage is still minus like 3%. Okay, you don't get to positive ROI until you get to third stage when you actually deploy and scale this Gen AI in production environment. Okay, so what that means, a lot of company will just quit, right? Because if you run an experiment and you have negative ROI, why would you continue? Why would you continue? A lot of companies, even if you have a really like visionary CEO and say like, okay, we're just gonna do it anyway, right? And then you go through the second stage, you run the pilot, running a real pilot, that's actually long running, and not just like an experiment stage, right? And you still realize minus 3% in terms of ROI. You still not realizing any positive ROI. Why would you continue through the third one, right? It takes a lot of, I would say, perseverance and I would say to push this through and say like, we just believe in this and get to stage 3, right? And like I said, the reason for this, a lot of it is actually because the mechanism they drive takes time and takes like scale to realize, right? Because they drive productivity, they drive efficiency. They don't actually drive, I would say, like these like top line, like revenue improvement, margin improvement, right? So it takes a while for them to get through that. And then once you get to third stage, you realize like 11% positive ROI and then more on the fourth stage, right?
Let me challenge this model to some extent, because if I have a negative return on a pilot, which in my eyes is something I use productively, in the confined scenario, then one of this pilot, then one of 2 things is very likely the culprit. The vendor is screaming me, or I chose the wrong scenario.
So, well, right, and that's part of the problem, is that a lot of the pilots that companies have undertaken are too ambitious, or they're too generic. And one of the things that came out of this quote unquote MIT Nanda study, which is what I insist on calling it since it's not an MIT study per se, is that there were much higher success rates on projects when you work with an established vendor. And this is one of the keys right now, is to start absorbing this technology and learning how to use it with a vendor that you trust, because when you dig into enterprise AI, the architectures are pretty complex, and staying on top of which model performs better, being able to swap out models, being model agnostic, right sizing models, adding RAG and tool calling and all of that. Most companies aren't capable of that. And if you can't use those things, then guess what? You can't securely incorporate your data into the project. And so how are you going to get a result? But like, so for example, when you do business with a company that has built this into their product, then suddenly you're interacting with your finance data in new ways and stuff like that. And it's not just an operational efficiency play. It's expanding how you serve your customers and your internal stakeholders. Now, just real quick on this issue, because I want to hear what Michael thinks of this, but one of the interesting things right now is the whole AI bubble talk. And of course, we're going to talk about that in the market when even Sam Altman says we're in a bubble. Of course, Sam Altman's scrambling a little bit right now because GPT-5 was disappointing and underwhelming. But the point is that you're going to have that talk. And what I thought was really interesting, I wrote about this week because we had some enterprise talk on this, and Larry Dignan over at Constellation, who's a very sharp observer, polled his team and kind of came out with his own conclusion. And he talked about bubble symptoms like low ROI, failed launches, hype-driven startups, the kinds of things we've talked about. Inflated valuations are definitely out there. But he says, but not fully a bubble. Enterprise platforms and infrastructure are building lasting value. So I want to focus on that for a sec, because I want to talk about why enterprises find this technology so intriguing. And there's a few reasons. One is that historically, we've never really been able to open up enterprise systems to a broad range of users and have them interact with those systems in ways that are intuitive and helpful to them in their day-to-day jobs. Well, if you start using this technology even for a little bit, no matter what kind of feedback you get, you can tell you can interact with these systems much, much more easily than the so-called rule-based bots of old that were like, sorry, please choose between talk to representative and issue, whatever. It's like who can even use this technology? So the technology opens up a lot of potential interactions for employees and maybe even customers. And also enterprises have figured out, the smart ones, how to constrain these technologies to particular use cases with their own data. It turns out when you help these systems with very industry specific data, the stuff that comes out of it is guess what? Way better and way more relevant to your use case. And then the third part is that enterprises have always struggled with this structured and unstructured data problem around processes, right? So you have transactional systems that are executing certain things, but then there's all kinds of documentation around those transactions that has kind of been historically disconnected. And so like, when you take sales, for example, you're executing sales, but on the back channel, you have all this discussion around clients and what's going on with this client and why are they unhappy? And all of this is totally siloed. And how the hell do you serve a customer when everything is siloed? And these technologies, if you do some homework around the data prep, are really pretty good at combining structured and unstructured information so that you can ask systems, hey, what's going on with this customer? And they can provide you with all this information. Is it any wonder that enterprises are excited about this? And so what I would say is, yeah, like, if we were talking about blockchain or a metaverse, I'd be saying, man, this is a bubble and we should all run for cover. But there's some meat on the bone here. And so I would say for companies, don't give up on this stuff, but also don't buy into just that this technology is just magic. You have to impose some discipline and constraints around it if you want to be one of the winners.
Yeah, I think that's I like to kind of, second that, to continue that this talk track a little bit, because, as I said before, right, the people who actually get to stage 3 realize high ROI, 11% more, right? So the definitely ROI. The trick is getting to that stage 3. It takes time. It takes you, you may have a pilot and an experiment that both realize negative ROI, and you just have to just accept that, right? That's just most companies are doing that. The reality is that like Gen AI as a technology is not cheap. It's still not cheap. It's relatively new. It's not cheap to the point that, you can realize ROI right when you just do an experiment, right? So what's the strategy? What's the best strategy for actually sustain yourself through these, sometimes they call this the ROI valley of death, because you have to kind of go down to the valley first before you come up, right? So how do you get through that? the best way is to use an AI that has fast ROI, big ROI, and proven ROI. Okay, so what are some of those AI that actually have fast ROI, big ROI, and proven ROI? Well, I think there are actually a lot. I mean, it may not be Gen AI. I think that the truth is you can implement some of these, these AI, as long as they meet those criteria. Because once you have a fast ROI, proven ROI, and big ROI, right? Then once you implement those, they will actually kickstart the flywheel, right? And you actually sustain yourself long enough so that you could get to stage 3, where essentially the productivity and efficiency gain takes over and keep the flywheel turning, right? But before you get there, you need something that will make sure that you don't starve of resources, in stage 1 and stage 2, because most companies don't make it beyond that. They just give up, right? Even though there's plenty of ROI and lots of good things that come out of it, they just never made it across that ROI valley of death, right? So you have to kind of start thinking like, what are some of those? Those are essentially, think of these are, as I talked before about the mechanism of ROI, right? AI that actually drive top line rather than driving efficiency, right? Yep. AI that drive margin improvement, AI that drive revenue lift. Those are, because once those are, impacting the revenue right away. Basically, that means fast ROI. If you implement it, deploy it today, tomorrow you start realizing ROI. It doesn't take time to accumulate, right? So if it's proven, you look at some industry that actually have been is standard, right? So these are the type of AI that you should look for, right? They may not be Gen AI to start with immediately, but those are the type of AI that you should start with to get the flywheel turning. And once you get through those first 2 stages, then the rest of the Gen AI, that you implement, and will actually, the efficiency and productivity takes over, and then the flywheel.
And starting with an area where you have some quality data that is already kind of like fairly quote unquote AI ready, and we could talk about what that looks like is huge there. I just wanted to throw in to kind of like spice this up, and Thomas, we'll hear from you in a sec, I know, but I just want to also just say that along with the ROI thing, I do think you need to cultivate a continued culture of experimentation and iteration around this technology. This technology requires a lot of trial and error inside of your company to see how it works with your data for your employees and customers. So it's different than a lot of traditional software that way. So it's a different mentality you need to be cultivating in your organization. And then also, don't make the mistake the big AI companies are making, where they move really fast and break a lot of things. And then later you find out that there's all kinds of ethics, risk management, and security issues that they overlooked. And that's the point, I think, of what we're going to get to into today's episode, is around the ethics of this. But sometimes you move ahead too fast and ignore the risks, ethics, and security implications. And the classic example, of course, right now is vibe coding, where there's already a ton of stories of people putting shit code into production and then exposing their own customers to data hacking and risk as a result of that. And so that's just one example, but the whole point is you have to incorporate the ethics of your company and risk and security into your building process early, because these technologies are very easy to manipulate, hack, and otherwise subvert.
Yeah. So what Michael just said is corroborating what you basically said before. So you need to come from a stable foundation. This goes into the corporate ethics part, the corporate culture part also, do the right things. But it also goes into the experimentation part. And this is where I go back to this Forrester study that was just commissioned by Zender. So that's basically, of course, an optimistic picture. But the statement is that within less than a year, you can have your payback period, or even on technologies that are as advanced and as new to the market as what we have with generative AI here right now. So how do you think that this comes together? So this, how does this seeming contradiction get resolved there? Coming with the four-stage model.
No, I don't think there's contradiction. I think it's a matter of like how you move, how quickly you move on to that stage 3, right? Because like I said before, because the mechanism that Gen AI typically drive for ROI is through productivity gain, efficiency gain, right? It takes time and scale to realize those, right? If each person realize just 10% efficiency gain, right? An engineer have they could realize a lot more, through just vibe coding and stuff like that. But like I said, if you take into all the I would say quality of the code that they produce and security and all that into consideration, right? It probably your gain will not be that big because you have to still tell it to code those things up, right? You still have to, if you didn't tell them to write all these security kind of guardrails in, right? It's not going to be to do it automatically. You just you just code what you ask it to code, right? So you need to still be able to ask it. How do you know what to tell it to do? You still need time to do that and review all the code, right? So like I said, it takes time and scale, to realize the benefit, the collective benefit, because they're cumulative, right? If each person realized 10% productivity gain, if you have 100 person, right? That's another, that's one employee, like kind of like 10 employee there, right? I mean, it's like, each person get 10%. So I guess the question that, John, you mentioned about, developing this culture experimentation, right? So there's something that you have to also ensure that happens in the company, right? Because how do you develop this culture? Culture is one of the most difficult things to change. You have to make it very, very easy, very, very, easy for people to do an experiment, right? And to some extent, it has to be what we call a fail-safe environment, right? Because the leadership team can ask all they want. You say, you could day and night say, try this, use this, experiment with this, right? Nobody's going to do it if they even smell a threat of chance that they could expose something and customer data or leak some data and get in trouble and get fired, right? No one will dare to experiment with anything if they have any fear, if they even sense a possibility of such a threat, right? But instead, if you say like, I create a secure, say like we use kind of, for example, in our company, we use Azure, and then basically we have a local private instance of those language models within the Azure environment, right? So there's basically no chance that you would ever leak anything out. If one day one of your employees say, oh, I think I accidentally told this language model, this chatbot, something about my customer, and you could just say, hey, no worry, we just scrap it, we just reboot the instance, right? And that's no harm done, right? If you make it a fail-safe, make it very safe for people to experiment, then people don't see any threat or any danger of their job or any error, and nobody's expert in Gen AI, right? So if they don't see that threat, that danger there, then they're much more likely to experiment.
Michael, if I can just add to that, though, that there is a significant problem, because in the study after study, including this most recent one, indicated the amount of shadow AI usage inside of organizations where employees evidently feel more than comfortable exposing very secure corporate data into tools that really shouldn't be consuming that data. But it's more and more the argument you're describing, which is provide people with secure sandboxes. But the big concern that I have, which goes back to culture, and this isn't quite ethics, but it's on the road to ethics, which is when you impose these AI first mandates onto employees and basically intimidate them into thinking that they're about to lose their jobs if they don't bust their asses to figure out how to be these productivity machines where they merge with the AI and become this hybrid robotic employee. That's exactly the wrong approach. I totally condemn that. And that's where a lot of companies are doing right now. And And what you really want is to employees to be enthusiastic that these tools are going to enable them to be more successful and to fulfill the corporate mission of serving their customers better and making a difference. And if they feel that way, then it gets exciting, because the ROI, Michael, that you described is just the beginning at that point, because what you've done, it's not just ROI. You've got these employees familiar with these tools, and they're now going to start surfacing ideas of how your company could do even better with these tools with new approaches. And hey, have we tried this and we have tried that? Anyone who uses these tools starts to get ideas like that. And if you create a culture where those ideas are rewarded, then I think you have a totally different play. But so many companies right now, I think, are just scaring people and intimidating them into working harder so they don't get replaced by these tools. And I think it's wrong, but I also don't think it's going to work. I don't think that's how that's going to get people to be most successful.
Yeah.
So the reality is that, like, there's 3 ways to get people to do things, right? There's the carrot, right? And there's a stick. And the third way is to make people actually want to do it, right? To actually want, right? So either incentivize them to do it, right? Or scare them into do it. Or
Michael, just real quick on that. The stick's already there, because there's so much hype around the fear of job loss and everything. The stick's already in everyone's minds. Are you going to just keep clobbering them with the stick? I mean, everyone knows about the stick. What we need is the carrot. Yeah. We need things to get excited about right now.
Yeah, I think that's where education and training, right, and making it safe, right, because people are already scared. Right? I mean, there's I mean, I think it's the best leaders. In my opinions, uses a combination of all, right? Yeah, the reality is out there. If you don't, it's for your own good, right? To learn how to use this. If you don't, you might get replaced. But we provide the training, we provide the help, right? We provide you to be better than yourself now. If you better prepare for the future job market, for the agentic workforce, right? I think there's no, I would say a good leader would never use just one way, right? It's always a combination of the stick and the carrot, and then make them actually want to do it themselves. It's not motivating them. I think that the third way is actually typically the best way. It's actually motivating them so they actually want to do it themselves. It's not driven by the stick or the incentive, right? You don't get a big promotion if you do it, or you don't get paid more if you do it, but if they intrinsically motivated, right? So it's all 3, but agree, if you only do the stick, right, it's probably in short term it will get people to start something, but it probably won't sustain.
See, I think that's our first disagreement of the episode in this sense, because I believe that the right way to judge employees is based on agreed upon KPIs. I used to have this argument all the time around sales, because I would have this boss would be like, this salesperson isn't logging into the internet, and they're not doing this or that, and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, they have specific performance goals. Go let them do their goals and achieve those goals. If they don't, then fine. Like there's developers that do great with very, very limited use of these tools. Now, most of them use it for something, but some of them are awesome without these tools. Some of them really thrive using the tools to actually tell people what to use. No, it's about what they deliver in the end. And I don't care what they do to do that, but that's my bias. I'm not telling companies how to do their jobs. And I'm well aware, Michael, that most companies are imposing mandates and stuff, and I can't stop them. But I just think people need to take a step back from that and really encourage people to surface inspired ideas and to do their jobs better. And this goes back to the whole goal. What is your goal right now? And I think the goal for companies should not be to use as much generative AI as we can, especially given that it's such an expensive technology with, by the way, environmental implications is one of the ethical issues that we were going to discuss, I think. But to take a step back and say, what do companies really want right now in most industries? And I think the answers are things like, we got to be resilient so that we don't get clobbered by black swan events that happen all the time now. And we want to serve our customers better than our competition. We want to develop new business models. We want to go directly to our customers instead of having to go through intermediaries. There's all kinds of potentials right now. It should start with that kind of stuff and then work its way backwards into a technology conversation. And maybe it's machine learning, and maybe it's computer vision, and maybe it's Gen AI, and maybe it's none of the above. Like we're really losing track of that. Having said that, I do think every company does need to have an AI strategy and be able to articulate what it is. So I got to eat some dog food on that. But but in general, I would like people to think more about what kind of company they want to be in their industry and how they want to be successful, and less about like we're forcing everyone to choke down as much Gen AI as they can.
Here we are at a nice segue to the topic of accountability that also Brent in his comment touched on. Basically, people are scared to use it. People are scared to not use it, and they are scared that they are accountable if things go wrong. So in the case of shadow IT and let's say unlicensed use of a ChatGPT, I can understand that. But if let's look at corporate IT and the mandate to use something that
I think
on top of all takes autonomous decisions. Who's like the infamous Air Canada bot that gave a discount that wasn't so good, or the car dealership that gave away the bot of the car dealership that gave away big trucks basically for free. Well, it's probably hard to hold the bot accountable, but who is accountable?
Well, if you want to go by the legal cases, so far the ruling is that the company's still accountable. So, the companies tried to. Well, this is an important point though, because the companies tried to get out of accountability for it and blame it on the bot, and that argument was not successful. So, I just want to point out that we may want to debate who's ultimately responsible, but from a legal framework, it's clear that the company is ultimately still going to be held responsible.
American, and not all countries have the notion of corporate accountability. In some countries,
I think one of those was a Canadian. I think one of those lawsuits was Canadian. But anyway, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, well, it's American.
I think at the end of the day, right, I think humans are still need to be held accountable, because it's one of those things that like we need to tell the AI what to do, right? Even at the level of agent who's actually able to automate them, we still need to tell them what goal to accomplish, right? And if we are able to tell them, to accomplish a goal, right, and without telling them any more context, right? What would you even do that for a human being? I just like, go make some money, go bring us a $1 million input, right? If I don't tell you how, what is the implicit message there, right? You have if you're sales or whoever you're in your role, you know that you can't violate law, but not these agents. These agents are not like, they could actually do things that are illegal, unethical, and things like that. So you have to specify the constraint, right? I want you to go make more money, make some money, or however, make $1 million or whatever, but you have to do it legally. You have to do it, and legal means you have to obey all these laws and different locations where the company operates. You have to be ethical, all these are, so these are the ethical kind of standard of the company. You have to read this every time you execute an action, right? So you have to be more careful, because a lot of things we assume to be understood with humans, right, is not necessarily implicitly understood by these AI agents, right? And we have to be very specific about that. And so when we actually tell these AI agents to do something, right, we are the one who's actually be responsible, because we tell them what to do, right? If we did not tell them to not do certain things, right, that's our responsibility as well, right? Humans are always accountable, right? Because you can't hold algorithm or AI accountable, right? It's the same reason why we still have, even though like today we have autopilot that could pretty much fly our plane, right? Except rare, very short time when during takeoff and landing, the pilot actually engages, right? The autopilot could pretty much fly our plane. Why do we still need pilot? Not just one pilot, but two pilots, right? Humans are still accountable. Humans are always need to be held accountable, regardless of what the AI do, because we are the driver of those AI, right? Whether telling them a goal, right, or tell them what are the constraints, the confine that they need to obey while achieving this goal, right? We need to tell them that. So,
indeed, and I agree 100% with what Michael just said, and I would just add that sometimes AI agents are presented like the autonomous enterprise is sort of inevitability, but in fact, every company has control over how and when they're going to use agentic systems and the level of autonomy they're going to provide these systems. And more, the smart people in this field talk about autonomy toggles that give a lot of granular control over which processes will be autonomous and which ones won't and why. And that's really going to vary by company, by industry, by regulatory environment, and all of that. And I would simply point out that today's agents are not as quote unquote intelligent as some of the agents we will deal with in the future are going to be. And so we have to deal with the constraints for today's agents. And a lot of times people say, well, you know, in 6 months, that'll be different. Sorry, but I don't think so. I mean, we can see how long it's going to take to get to systems that are more trustworthy on their own without adult supervision. And we can debate that till the cows come home. But what I will point out is that the big AI companies are running out of ideas right now. They're still trying to scale, but the improvements release by release are feeling more incremental, and reasoning turns out to be a pretty limited chain of thought, which has been the biggest idea they've come up with, turned out to be fairly limited and very much struggles outside of distribution, which is a core problem that today's AI struggles with in terms of being cognitively effective. So the point being that today's AI has limitations, but it's also very potent. And you know what's cool? It works best within constraints. And what are the enterprise good at? Imposing constraints, security profiles, risk profiles. So do all of that. And not only that, but also take risk factors into account when you design these systems, because you may be liable to the EU AI Act. You may be liable to whatever California comes up with next. And guess what? They've spelled out their risk expectations for you. You can choose to not obey them if you want, but you will get sued. So, you know, you may want to pay attention to that, because a lot of companies are getting sued right now for various issues. And by the way, they're not just agentic AI issues. A lot of the lawsuits pertain to algorithmic screening stuff that goes back at least 10 years. What Weapons of Math Destruction came out in 2016, which pointed out the problem with discriminatory systems. Those issues really have not been fundamentally addressed. So we can't blame all this on agentic AI.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah.
Thomas.
You're muted for some reason.
Thomas, you muted yourself. Shocking.
Oops.
Oh, well, I don't have anything meaningful to say. So how do we mitigate this right now? So because if I doubt that companies are good at setting constraints. They are not. The evidence is shadow IT and shadow AI. So they may be good at defining constraints, but they are lacking the follow through. Let's put it like that. So they are probably not giving also their people the right tools at hand, as evidenced by, well, the same report, I hesitate to call it a study, that basically says that the unauthorized use, shadow AI, of these tools creates success for the people who are using it in their jobs, whereas the authorized tools do not. So it means there may be guidelines that are technically enforced in corporate systems, but that are far from helpful. How to go away with it, or how to not to go away with it, how to work with it in a way that the outcome is productive and helpful.
Yeah, I think that the thing is, I don't really believe that like you should restrict anyone from using any of these tools, right? And the best way is to like I said, create a fail-safe environment and let them use those tools within your firewall, right? So that's the best way, right? If somebody do a survey in your company, right? What do people use? Do they use like Claude, or do they use ChatGPT, or do they use Gemini? Which one do more people? Let's have a vote, right? Let's get one at least into our within our firewall environment, so that it's safe for you to experiment. You don't even need to worry about making errors. Like people are like I think earlier Brent said like people are afraid to use it, afraid not to use it, afraid when to use it. It's like if you make it like fail safe, then people would have less concern, right? Because it is more about like, okay, you could create a more, I would say, even gamify, right, the the usage of these tools within the company, right? So if people are using this more, right, you could track usage and see like you create leaderboards and who's using it more, right? And then if you really wanted to do the, so I still agree. It's not that I don't disagree. I disagree with Jon that like the stick way is not the best way. I just say that like this. It usually is a combination of all three, right? So yeah, first you motivate them. That's the best way, right? And if you could also like kind of incentivize them, right? If you could, whoever wins the leaderboard or top usage or most creative use case, right? You get a bonus. You get a bigger bonus, right? And then so you could do all kinds of creative way to drive usage of these technology in a creative way in an enterprise environment, right? So yeah, the key thing, the fundamental thing is that safety had to be first thing, right? It had to be, if people have to feel safe to using those.
Thomas, look, I can't impose my own like risk and ethical values on companies. I'm totally aware of that, and but one thing I would say is the importance of working with trusted vendors, with domain experts who have impact in areas that you care about, so you can really get a taste for what AI can look like when it's really, you talk about constraints and that companies struggle with. One good way to deal with that is to work with vendors who have imposed constraints on their systems so you can experience what that looks like. So for example, I don't want to name vendors here because I don't want to turn into a promo show, but I'm thinking of a finance CFO software type vendor that has a finance specific copilot that I just did a podcast on. 10,000 companies are now interacting with this copilot around financial data, and they have built their own finance specific, they've trained their own finance specific LLM and they have figured out how to deploy custom models onto customer sites with their own data into those models. Now, does that mean that systems are always perfect and everything? No, of course not. But they're interacting with the system in a very different kind of a way than like, oh, go write me an email or something, which is just such a generic use case that it almost makes you almost want to just go to sleep because it's so boring. Not that it would never help, but it's not that interesting once you get a flavor for that. And then seeing the same thing in like industrial AI scenarios where but one of the challenges with some of these scenarios is making sure if you want to take advantage of this, you do have to get your equipment digitized. You have to get data. If you want to interact with machines and ask them, like, because think about it, you could start asking your most expensive equipment, how are you doing today? And the machine could tell you, but you have to wire the machine up first to make sure it's digitized. And that's what's holding some companies back from experiencing this. But once they do, they never want to go back because do you know the ROI of keeping these kind of machines online is like huge, right? So if you can predict some of the problems they're running into, and obviously predictive maintenance has been a thing for a while, this isn't new, but interacting with these systems in new ways and having them check in with you through an agentic system and say, hey, everything's good today, but I might need this in a week or whatever. How cool is that, right? And so I think when people get a flavor for that kind of AI, they realize like, man, I shouldn't have dismissed AI just because Google put a bunch of AI tools in workplace or whatever that didn't really help me, which is my current problem. We're being charged more for Google now because of their supposed amazing AI tools, and I can't find a single one that helps me do my job better. But that's because it's just an administrative like document thing. It's not really embedded in the workflows and the processes. And that's the key to this MIT report, is it talks about integrating AI into systems and processes. That's when it gets exciting.
Doesn't that confirm that basically companies are not getting their constraints right? Part one. The usage of the systems via external systems seems to confirm to me that, secondly, at least people show some sense for or some curiosity to experiment with tools. And thirdly, besides not getting the constraints right, are they looking at the wrong scenarios to use? I mean, I meanwhile cringe when I hear I get an email from you.
Yeah, so think about this, right? I mean, so companies do define their constraints, right? I mean, they have documents for people for HR onboarding, everything to show them how to do things within a particular company, right? They have all those documented somewhere, right? The thing to make these AI agents or LLM, right, aware of those constraints is to turn those into assets that they could read, right? Basically, you know, through retrieval augmented generation, you can actually create, you know, maybe snippets of these, these documents, right? And then basically turn them into, using the retrieval augmented generation, right? Turn them into a part of the system prompt. Every single prompt that the AI gets from the user, you always tag it with a whole bunch kind of requirement, and you can never remember. You must not do, and then you must follow these compliance standard, ethical standard, and all that. You know, put that as tag them on, right? So even though the user never typed those, it's automatically tagged on, right? And that's just a very simple way to impose those constraints, right?
Doesn't work.
Hmm?
Apparently, just that it doesn't work. I mean, those systems have a good history in ignoring those tagged on.
Well, if you,
right.
Yeah. So well, I mean, you can always, if you intentionally try to get around it, you can get around it, right? There's always, every generative AI system can be, I would say, using clever languages, or you could bait them into prompt injection and all that stuff to do things that's outside of its constraint, right? So yeah, there's no, but if you actually do put those system prompts in there, right, it actually resolve, like I would say, 80-90% of the use cases where people actually have good intention, usually just like carelessness or some, yeah, if you have an employee who intentionally want to circumvent your security, and then you have other problems. I think the company has other issues, right? Usually it's not the case that employee would, willfully, intentionally try to violate some constraints or compliance, right? Usually it's just carelessness, right? So if those things are in there, and usually if you don't intentionally try to circumvent it and having those as part of the system prompt, right, then this LM will say, well, it looks like what you're asking violates this employee. Do you still want me to proceed, right? Most employee would just say, oh, maybe I should check, right? Maybe I should do something different, right? At least make them aware, right? There's no guarantee to prevent it, but at least, you can actually impose it in a way that makes the employee aware that they are actually violating something, and it's their decision to go forward or not.
Totally agree. And Thomas, I mean, this notion that technology, any technology can fix customers has been discredited a long time ago. So just add AI to the list. I mean, AI makes good companies better and bad companies worse. It's an accelerant. So there's nothing any of us can do about that on today's broadcast. But I want to touch on ethics a little bit, because that was the advertised topic of today's discussion. And Michael is exactly right in the sense that the ethics and security mindset, and the risk, I would add as well, it's not something to check every 6 months or something. It should be baked into your development process, into your culture, into your design. And in fact, some innovative vendors have figured out how to do this and how to create auditable systems that actually do create alerts for developers and flag these things, and this should be happening during the use case design period as well. Some companies have ethic board reviews on new use cases and stuff like that. This should all be baked into what you're doing. I found very few ethical issues that were very unique to agentic AI in particular. One of the issues that could be a little unique to agentic AI is disclosing that you're interacting with the bot. Some people might debate whether we should do that, but it's required in certain legislation. For example, the EU AI Act requires that. So take that for what it's worth. There are some inherent ethical compromises in LLMs in general, including the use of copyrighted information. There's hundreds of lawsuits going on that issue right now. I have strong feelings about that. Exploited labor has been a famous issue of building these systems, including OpenAI's infamous exploitation of Kenyan workers for toxic materials. So that's another issue. Environmental consequences of these large models. So that's an ethical issue. But that's not unique to agentic AI. Then I already referred to the algorithmic issues that go back 10 years. I would add one more, which is bias. And that's the other one that has to be integrated into our workflows and how we think about AI, which is we need ways of understanding the bias in these systems, as well as the bias of the people in our teams that are using those systems. We can't blame technology for the biases because the biases really come from us, but we must have a system to understand how those biases play out. And if we don't, especially when we venture into higher risk use cases, for example, things involving recruitment and talent and succession and stuff like that, we're going to find ourselves in legal troubled waters.
Yeah. Let's add a societal issue. I mean, there are justified or not, many CEOs still think they can fire a bunch or not hire a bunch of juniors and replace them with the so smart AI. Well, there are tons of reports on consulting companies. There are even voices, hey, you don't, that's an analyst, by the way, voices that say, oh, yeah, you don't need the juniors, you need the expertise, so you just acqui-hire, well, the mid to seniors from somewhere else. But that to me sounds like a road into the abyss instead of somewhere meaningful, because there can't be an unlimited supply of, well, seniors if nobody trains them.
I've been researching this topic, but I'll let Michael go first.
Yeah, I think that is, I think that's probably a temporary phenomenon. I think that any technology, whether it's AI or other domain, right? I think initially when it's introduced, right, companies are still trying to figure out essentially how to use it together with the employee to maximize essentially think of it as an ROI per employee, right? They're trying to think about how do I, okay, if a AI plus employee, I could get like, one employee is one employee productivity, right? If I have an AI plus employee, maybe you get like, 5x in productivity, right? So that's like 5 people, right? That's the maximum you can get, right? Then, okay, but people don't know that right now. People are experimenting with that. Some people get like 1x, 2x, 3x, right? So they don't know. They're trying to limit this hiring to essentially let the company see where is the maximum, where is this maximum, right? Once they figure out, okay, this, okay, maximum is 5x, right? Then yeah, that very soon, very quickly, every company is going to get that AI plus employee and 5x. You level the playing ground. What are you going to do? You're still going to hire those junior people, right? I think it's a temporary effect that companies are still trying to figure out how to maximize the productivity per employee, right? What is that maximum, right? And before they figure out what that is, they're reluctant to hire more, because why would I could still get the same kind of productivity with the same, right? And with the help of this AI, so in the meantime, right, I think people are feeling the pain, right? Especially graduates, and that's a little bit unfortunate. And I think that, yeah, we do need to take that into consideration and maybe hire people who are, and then maybe work with them to use this AI, and maybe to some extent use the AI as a mentor, right? So that, so the AI together, become, I would say that this knowledge base, right, that this of the entire company that keeps all the knowledge and the working knowledge, because this AI talks to everybody, right? It has to, you can ask them about an HR question or process questions or anything you want, right? It has this incorporate and actually ingest, and if you do it right, you should be able to remember and learn those knowledge as the company is using it, right? So once you have that, then this AI becomes the ultimate kind of mentor for everybody, right? You may be a sales expert, but you're not a product expert, but you can still ask AI. So even though the product expert may not be online, you can still ask AI for product questions, right? So
yeah, and just real quick, I know we're almost out of time, but the reassurance I take is that this is heavily contested. The data isn't conclusive that like all these juniors are going away. I mean, the AWS CEO, who knows a thing or two about AI, just said that if you stop hiring junior developers, you're an idiot, basically. He said it's a huge mistake. A lot of companies have done layoffs very arrogantly and then had to hire people back in various capacities because of the so-called AI overreach. But I think the most fruitful discussion is to kind of set that aside a little bit. It's a bad economy right now too, so it's really there's a lot of factors that are encouraging companies to be operationally ruthless right now. But you're right, Thomas. It gives certain CEOs an excuse to do that. And I would just say, what kind of company are you? And if you're going to sacrifice your own future talent pipeline, it sounds to me like you're a pretty self-defeating company. A much more interesting question is the one Michael hit on, which is how do you get your juniors up to speed in new creative ways in this new economy? And I think AI can play actually a role in helping juniors become more effective, but that's the model that we need to flesh out. And in my mind, I'll just add to Michael's that I think along with AI training juniors, I think another key would be to use AI to match juniors with human mentors inside their organization based on career growth and preferences, and combine the AI mentor with a human mentor. And the human mentor is also going to be incredibly important because there's a lot of things an AI mentor can't teach. And I won't go into all of that now, but it includes some nuances of domain expertise, but also the so-called emotional intelligence that's become so important in today's workplaces.
That's where I actually wanted to get to with it. And I actually would formulate it a little stronger than self-defeating. What I would think is that those companies that choose that route are going the way of the dodos.
Well, that's the beauty of these different approaches to AI is let the market decide, right? Like let's see who's effective and who's not. I believe there's a really human empowering way to use this technology. Let's see the proof points, because I'm well aware that it can be used for bad ways too. So let's find out, right?
The easier ones to use, because of you do not need to think about guardrails.
Well, I mean, I think that it easy actually is actually a very good kind of behavior driver. You know, if you make it easy, a lot of people will do it. You know, just So, but that's definitely not the best way to do it. You know, just because it's easy. I think it's we've seen time after time that as Jon said, like once company figure out that okay, 5x is whatever the maximum is, right? Maximum productivity achievable when AI plus human work together with human, right? Then every company pretty soon will basically go to that maximum, right? We'll reach that maximum, right? And then you level the playing field. You're competitive, right? So are you gonna just stop hiring because you just stop scaling there? I mean, it's just like you will still hire. I mean, maybe you will start hiring back the people you just fired, a few months ago, because now you figure out that, okay, now all my competitors are actually have AI plus human, right? And they are achieving 5x productivity gain, right? So they could do a lot more, a lot faster. So what do? I think that's precisely, the same kind of story from the other side of the coin. You be just shooting yourself in the foot. Yeah.
By the way, just to spice things up for a preview of a future discussion, I do believe that someday robots will have rights, and that will be part of the ethical conversation. So, but skip that for today. But I think someday, yes. I think someday, yes. I think someday, yes. Not yet, though.
Yeah. That makes for great, famous last words. Let's go for robotic rights. Thanks, Michael and Jon, for this incredibly vivid conversation.
Absolutely.
It's good that we have some disagreement in this.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, finally a debate. Finally. So this has been it for today. If in the audience is still someone who wants to try to compete Jon and Michael, let us hear. Then we'll see to it that we get you in. Else, thanks Michael and Jon for this. And everybody tune in next week when we try again to get Kenneth Christensen with a deep dive into the challenges that global alliance management can cause these times. After last week, he unfortunately fell ill. So bad luck. Okay. Thanks to everybody. Bye and see you next week.
Take care.